best thing I have for a gavel. This meeting will come to order. This is a meeting of the Bloomington Monroe County MPO Policy Committee for August 2022. Could we please have introductions? Starting on my left.
Recording in progress.
Very good. This is a meeting of the Bloomington Monroe County MPO for August 2022. And so, I don't know if we call the roll or just have introductions, but why don't we start on my left with Ms. Kinsey.
Jillian Kinsey, present on behalf of the Bloomington Plan Commission.
Sarah Ryder-Van, Chair of the Monroe County, Bloomington Monroe County, MPO, CAC.
Julie Thomas, County Commissioner.
Pamela Samples, Elspo Town Council and Elspo Planning Commission.
Lisa Ridge, Monroe County Highway Director.
Steve Olin, member of the Bloomington City Council.
Andrew Seabor, serving as proxy for Mayor Hamilton.
Doug Horn with Bloomington Public Transit Corporation Board of Directors.
Margaret Clements, President of the Monroe County Plan Commission.
Chris Wallman, Indot.
And arriving just in time to be acknowledged.
Jason Bannock, IU.
Thank you. We have a quorum. This represents the agenda for today's meeting. Briefly, we'll have approval of minutes. We'll have communications from the chair, reports from officers and/or committees, the Technical Advisory Committee and the Citizens Advisory Committees. And under reports from MPO staff, we'll have the fiscal year 2023-2024 Unified Planning Work Program, the fiscal year 2022 to 2026 Transportation Improvement Program, fiscal year 2022 Fund Balance. We will consider the State Road 48 speed limit improvement, the Indot fiscal year 2023 Target Setting Draft version 5.16, the calendar year 2021 Indot Public Transit Annual Report, the Indot Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Plan available for review and public comment. Under old business, we'll consider the fiscal year 2022 to 2026 TIP amendment for the Eagleson Avenue Bridge over the Indiana Railroad. Under new business, we'll consider TIP amendments for rural transit, Monroe County, and the City of Bloomington. We'll go to public comment on matters not included on the agenda, limited to 5 minutes per speaker. We'll go to communications from committee members on matters not included on the agenda, including topic suggestions for future agendas. Then we'll review our upcoming meeting schedule before adjournment. Are there any motions to amend the agenda? If not, since there are no members attending virtually, if we can have a voice vote for approval of the agenda, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say nay. The agenda is approved. We'll now go to approval of minutes. Is there any motion to approve minutes?
I have an edit here.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to edit the
You'd like to edit
minutes. Yes.
the
There's
minutes?
a problem
Okay.
with the minutes?
Well, we need to have a motion to approve them first, and then you can edit them.
You didn't do that before.
Okay, I'll motion to approve the minutes, but with Sarah's edit.
Well, we'll entertain amendments. So is there a second for a motion?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Ryderband, what would you like to edit?
It identifies me as the vice chair of this body, which is true last year, but not this year. I did indeed chair the meeting, but I am not the vice chair. Thank you.
Is that easily stricken, gentlemen? Okay. Are there any other amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, if there's no objection, again, I'll call for a voice vote for approval of the minutes. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Those minutes are approved. We now go to communications from the chair. I don't have much to say except to welcome everybody back in the room. It's good to see everybody physically present, first time in a long time. Let's move now to reports from officers and/or committees. Is there a report from the Technical Advisory Committee?
brief report, the Technical Advisory Committee met in a special meeting this morning, a special Friday edition of the TAC, and we did hear the fiscal year 2022, 2026 TIP amendments, and we're in favor of all of them, and staff will certainly talk about some more detail about this limited funding arrangement that we can still get the numbers of rural transit, but make sure we know.
Sorry, is your mic on? We're having trouble hearing you. If you can get closer to it, that'd be great.
Yeah, so staff can talk a little bit about this in more detail, but the TAC did hear the fiscal year 2022, 2026 TIP amendments, and did vote in favor of them all, and the rural transit approval, and the Monroe County, City of Bloomington project. Staff can again talk more about this. TAC is generally supportive of these, and there's some funding arrangements that were proposed that TAC is definitely supportive of.
Very good. Any questions for the Technical Advisory Committee? Seeing none, we'll go to the report from the Citizens Advisory Committee.
The Citizens Advisory Committee met on Wednesday in special meeting in order to address the TIP amendments that we'll be talking about today. We voted in favor of the TIP amendment, but could not fully appreciate it. We said that since we did not have final numbers for the disbursement of the funds we'll be discussing, we voted to ratify it as long as this is fiscally constrained. We're in support. We also addressed an old item of business that also is an old item for the Policy Committee, and that is amending the public participation plan. And I will address that later when we get to item, maybe it's 10, the communications from committee members on items not on the agenda, but it is before you in paper form. So that's what that little piece of paper is about. And the CAC indeed agreed with the edit and endorses this edit to the public participation plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the Citizens Advisory Committee? Seeing none, thank you for that report. We now move to reports from the MPO staff. Let's start with the fiscal year 2023-24 UPWP. Mr. Martin or Mr. Clemens?
This is mine.
Okay. Please, again, try
Microphone.
everyone speaking to the microphone as closely as you can.
Okay, it's on. It's on. I just have to get it closer.
Yeah.
Okay, the fiscal year 2023-2024 Unified Planning Work Program, which we submitted to you in draft form, remained unchanged in final form. The Indiana Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Transit Administration had no review comments on the draft submission. However, they reserved comments for a final submission. We submitted the final submission. They, again, did not make any comments. So we therefore received an approval letter on June 24th, dated June 24th, from the Federal Highway Administration, approving the work program just by the hair on our chin, because the deadline was June 30th. So we were a little bit concerned, but the plan itself has in it approximately $330,000 in federal funds. Of that, $50,000 are allocated to Bloomington Transit for a strategic plan. Bloomington Transit's already initiated strategic plan as of July 1st. Went through a consultant selection and initiated the plan, so they're currently working on that. The plan itself addresses all of the planning emphasis, the Unified Planning Work Program addresses all of the planning emphasis areas. These are all national, which came down to us on tackling climate change, equity and justice 40, complete streets, public involvement, strategic highway network, federal land management, planning and environmental linkages, data and planning, TIP review process, and the metropolitan planning area and urban area boundaries, which will be forthcoming from the Census Bureau. I I have nothing else to say about that unless anybody has any questions.
I'll open up the floor to questions, but I just wanted to note that Councilmember Wilt has come, which means that for the first time, and as long as I can remember, every member of the MPO is physically present in the room. Welcome to all of you. Are there questions? Thank you for coming. I'll open the floor to questions on the fiscal year 2023-2024 UPWP. Questions on my left? Questions on my right? I'll just ask one brief question to the staff. How long has this document been in the process of being formulated?
We begin January 1st or 2nd with the development of a cost allocation plan. That usually takes a month in itself to develop and succeed approval, and then we develop the plan itself concurrently starting in January months, since essentially January 1st. Before we finally get a final approval. So it's always a 6-month process.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Do we not vote on this, or is it just a report? I'm sorry.
Just a report.
It's not old business, you're right, thank you. Let's move on to the next item.
Okay, we have for you, if you can scroll to that. The fiscal year, the Transportation Improvement Program balances. This is something we normally don't show anybody. Not that it's a big secret or anything. It's actually the next one after the crash report. There we go. Whoops. There we go, right there. This is we receive a monthly report from the Indiana Department of Transportation showing how all of the metropolitan planning organizations in Indiana are faring in terms of using their allocated funds for capital improvement projects. As you can see in the second column there, you see a lot of 100%, and then you get down to the yellow highlight for Bloomington, Monroe County, it's 100% also. So we were able to use all of our money by June 30th before any of it lapsed. You also see there a number down in the lower part of the far right-hand column, which says $983,997. This is the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act money, the IIJA money, which we did a call for projects for last month, and we received the applications for and what we will be discussing later on in this meeting for Transportation Improvement Program amendments. But the bottom line here is that we spent all of our money, which is a good thing. That's the purpose of why we exist, is to make sure that we use all of their money, all of our money, I'm sorry. It's all of our money, make sure we use all of our money for capital projects and then ask for more, which is what we will be doing hopefully later on today. And that's all I've got on that, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions on the fund balance? To my right? To my left, Ms. Ryderman.
Yes, when you get to the bottom of that column, we see that, indeed we've got maybe a month before everybody has to have spent those funds, but there's going to be quite an excess of funds, potentially. I'm curious to know what will happen with that excess of funds. Will it be redistributed? Does it go back to the federal government? Does it get distributed amongst the MPOs that have indeed already spent those monies? What will happen to that potentially $10 million?
Of that column for the IIJA money?
Yeah,
well,
I'm looking at the difference
14
between the available and the obligated, and I
Yeah.
realize that not all MPOs have obligated those funds quite yet at the time that this was done. However, since we've seen that some of them do not obligate all their funds to begin with, as we saw in that first column, I'm wondering what happens with those excess IIJA funds.
Those funds are not redistributed to the urbanized areas. Those funds go back to the Indiana Department of Transportation. and they use those funds themselves.
Thank you.
Further questions? If not, we'll move on to the State Road 48 speed limit improvement.
All right, so earlier this year when I was reviewing crash data for the last several years, I started to notice a trend on State Route 48 where, between Bloomington and Whitehall, and I've gotten several citizen complaints about how they're sliding off the roadways and some of these curves in between State Route 43 and South Garrison Chapel Road. So I looked into it further and noticed indeed that there are several incidents of, especially when the pavement is slick or wet, that vehicles are sliding off the roadway there. There's not much of a shoulder to speak of in a lot of this portion. So I requested a traffic study from Indot to look into this area between State Route 43 and Garrison Chapel Road. A few months later, in July, they got back to me saying that they reviewed the crash history, existing signage, what a typical roadway for the posted speed limit is with regard to the turning radii onto this type of roadway. And they got back to me saying that the area between State Route 43 and Cave Road is marked at 55 miles an hour. But from Cave Road into Bloomington, it's 45 miles an hour. And on State Route 43, it's also 45 miles an hour. So vehicle speeds in this area in question here, if you can see that, are higher than what the advised speeds are supposed to be for a roadway that has limited shoulders and these types of curves. So Indot got back to me saying that they are going to, within the next month or two, be reducing the speed limit from 55 miles an hour to 45 miles an hour from State Route 43 to Cave Road to make all of State Route 48 from Bloomington to Whitehall 45 miles an hour.
Thank you. Does that complete the report?
That completes the report. If our Indot representative would like to add anything more to that, I'd be happy to hear that, but if not, then yes.
Are there questions or comments on my left about State Road 48? On my right, Mr. Wallman, did you want to say anything?
I have nothing to add.
Okay, the only thing that I want to add is that you may notice that this area does not lie within the MPO's Metropolitan planning area. The MPO looks at crash data and crash history for all of Monroe County, and this was just a trend that stuck out to us, as well as we got some citizen input, and we directed that to the Indiana Department of Transportation. So that's why we're looking at it.
Ms. Kinsey.
Yeah, just a quick question. One, I appreciate looking into this and your curiosity and responsiveness to citizen complaints. I also wonder, though, will those citizens actually receive a response back about this change and how their input affected a real change in the program? And I ask that, but also think that might be a good practice to do if you don't do that already. And then also how people will be notified of this change. I mean, aside from the obvious swapping signs for the speed limit, is there any other notice that's official?
That's a good point. I think if a speed limit or if signage changes in an area, I think that there is a sign saying or indicating something that condition has changed in the area, so be on alert for that. With regard to public comment, I think that's a great idea, and we can look into notifying those people who have reached out to us. So yeah, thank you for that.
Could I ask that you basically, when you notify the people who reach out to you, that you CC the chair or at least the policy committee so that we can see when you've done it?
Sure.
I mean, we eventually have to be accountable as well, so it would help us to be able to. I think her idea is a really good one.
Yes, absolutely. But also, this is just a notification about something that we have looked into. This is not necessarily a project that is within the Metropolitan planning area, so it's not really of policy committee, I don't know, what's the word?
Take the credit. Take the credit.
Purview, thank you, yes. So.
All right, any further questions on this item? If not, we'll move on to the, sorry, Ms. Reiterband.
Question of whether or not there is some notification, like do you put up red flags that tell us that the speed limit has been dropped in an area when it does get reduced?
I'm not aware of any kind of additional signage that goes up. There is a possibility that a press release could be put out or something like that, but that's probably how we would do it if we were going to communicate that.
Could you speak into the mic, Chris?
Sorry. I'm not aware of any additional signage that gets put up, but we could probably put out a press release or something like that to let the public know those changes are being made. That's probably how we would typically do it.
I mean, I think it would benefit everyone, both Indot and the MPO and the bodies that are represented here generally. It's on our agenda for a reason, to just have some kind of a notice that we can point to saying that citizen input was taken into account and resulted in a change here. So I want to endorse that idea from Ms. Kinsey. Let's move on now to the Indot fiscal year 2023 target setting draft version 5. Ms. Reiterband.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Oversize. Sorry, we're waiting to get that up. This is in your packet. This is a draft version. I want to note, every year we come to you with the Indiana Department of Transportation's target setting for crashes. This is a requirement of the Federal Highway Administration, U.S. Department of Transportation. And what we're sharing with you, usually we don't share the draft, but we are this time. We're sharing with you what they're projecting in the way of fatalities, suspected serious injuries, and then also total crashes, which don't result necessarily in injury, and then also rates of injuries by VMT, vehicle miles traveled. As you can see here, and we had the discussion with Andrew Seabour earlier today, it's showing a projection for an increase in fatalities in 2023. This will be submitted in a final form to the Federal Highway Administration probably next month, and then we will be required to adopt that or come up with our own methodology for projecting. It's showing an increase, and so far this year, tracking the data so far this year, fatalities are up statewide almost 13%. That's highly correlated with what I would call employment and economic activity. It's totally unacceptable, but that's what it's correlated with. And then the other crash rates for serious injury by year, non-motorized fatal and serious injuries by year, and also fatality rate by year and serious injury rate by year. Those are showing what I would call relative flatline increases, flatline to a slight increase here and there. But this is just for informational purposes for you to alert you to the fact that we'll be coming back to you probably in November, October, November, with the final target setting rates, which we will then ask for your approval. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there questions for staff on the target setting draft? From my right, Mr. Seabour.
Thanks. I guess just a question, and maybe these can be follow-up, but Are these numbers, especially as we look back in time, are they, the titling is just confusing, and it's probably more coming from somebody else, but what is a measured, like what actually happened versus what is a projection? Like I'm trying to understand and make that distinction, and it's just not clear to me.
Sure. Everything in here are actual data up to 21, 22. 21 and 22 were anomalous years given the pandemic, and we had declines of something like, at one point in time in 2020 and 2021 period, we had declines of statewide traffic by 43%. I think for the end of the year, it ended up being somewhere around 20-some% decline in overall VMT, vehicle miles traveled statewide. That recovered slowly, and then it's recovered like a lion almost in the last 12 months with the resurgence of the economy. There are still some issues with supply chain shortfalls. Trucking traffic, though, however, has picked up, or commercial vehicle traffic has picked up substantially. But the projection is essentially for 23, fiscal year 23 is what it's showing, and that's the line there. Prior to, well, for all the years up into 2020 before the pandemic started, it was highly correlated with employment. Almost something like a 94%, 0.94 correlation, R squared. And then that went out the window. So in 21, 22, and then 23 numbers, they've taken what I would call a trend line instead, which is, in other words, a best guess, because we've got 2 years of bad data there in the middle of that long trend. I mean, looking at the way the traffic is performing right now and what they have to report, the odds are that we may not meet, the state may not meet its safety targets for the year, which would mean that there would be a penalty or a shift of money from Surface Transportation Block Grant to HSIP or Highway Safety Improvement Program type projects. In other words, there would be more of an emphasis on safety. I hope that answers your question. That's a long answer.
I think maybe it's a future thing to look at a little bit more, but it'd be interesting to see over time what the target was versus what the actual was, and that just the concerning trend that staff mentioned, I had spoken to them earlier today about, was I think in the past when we have been voicing or taking action on this topic, just expressing concern with the language of what our target is. But I think that at this point, I'm also just concerned to see that the target is going in the opposite direction of what we would want it to see. So just making that comment, I know it's not an action item today, but
yes.
That's all.
Yes, we will make a follow-up.
Ms. Ryderband.
Yes, I'm well aware that the National Safety Council is working hard in a series of webinars on the road to zero. And certainly when I look at this data, we are headed in the opposite direction, which is alarming at best. And I'd really like to know what the state of Indiana and its MPOs are all doing to change this trend, to turn this stupid freight around and get down to no fatalities, no serious injuries on our roadways. Can anybody help me?
Does staff have an answer?
I can research an answer. I don't have an answer off the cuff, off the top of my head. I know that the Traffic Safety Division of Indot has been working overtime on different methodologies. There's been a high number of crashes occur in what I would call work zones. There's been an extraordinary emphasis on the part of law enforcement to cover work zones for the Department of Transportation, where the speeding fines are something like triple, double, triple, whatever they should be. As far as, and they've also done more selective enforcement meaning they target certain areas for what I would call impaired drivers. And then there will be upcoming, you'll see this with the start of school, you'll see more patrols out on the state highways, and also probably with local law enforcement on the county and the city level too, because there's usually a trickle down of safety money for additional patrols and overtime that coincides with the beginning of a new school year, a new academic year, and that's not college academic, that's K through 12 academic. So yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that you could, that are out there that are occurring. I just don't have a laundry list with me right now, but we can get those for you.
Thank you.
Further questions on the traffic target setting draft? I have one. First of all, by the way, this is just for our MPO, not for the whole state, right?
This is the statewide projection,
How
not for our
does
MPO.
Indot determine VMT?
Vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah, how do they, is that an estimate or is that a measurement?
It's a pretty good measurement. They have permanent count stations across the entire state of Indiana. Those permanent count stations are there recording every second of 24 hours of 365 days over decade upon
of every
decade
highway.
upon decade. Yeah, and then on top of that, they have, on top of the permanent count stations, they have, some of the MPOs have permanent count stations, which are continuously counting. And then we also go through a method of what I'd call Highway Performance Monitoring System, HPMS, where we have certain locations that are counted every 3 years on a 3-year cycle, and that's been going on since the 1990s, something like that. And those counts go into a big database and all of that. And
Well, those I've seen, I just knew that I didn't know that there were any permanent ones.
Yeah. So the statistical methodology out there is solid. I'll say that. And so, and the vehicle miles traveled is important too, because that determines how much a state gets in terms of gas tax revenue or user fee revenue from Washington, D.C.
So, but if this chart represents statewide, then what do we have to say about it in our MPO? Like, we're not...
We will come back to you, we, the staff, will come back to you with Indot's target setting, which all the MPOs are required to either adopt their targets or come up with our own methodology approved by the Federal Highway Administration. This is something we do every year. It's required by Congress, and it's part of what I've called the FAST Act. I think it first occurred somewhere around 2016 or somewhere in that vicinity.
Well, then, to follow up with one more question, following up on Ms. Reiterband's question, I mean, if we want to, make a meaningful reduction in the target because, we don't want to see as many fatalities, how much is within our power as an MPO policy committee to affect that number?
Well, it'd be pretty hard. I mean, these are statewide. I mean, you're talking...
So the other MPOs would have to agree with us?
Yeah. You're talking Northwest Indiana all the way down to Evansville, New Albany, and Fort Wayne and all of that, everything in between. We could come up with our own methodology that we want to adopt, but to do that, we would have to have a justifiable statistical method to show that our targets are more reasonable from a statistical standpoint than the state of Indiana's targets.
Ms. Reiterband.
Yeah, could you also explain the consequences of our not having an adequate number there and coming in with many more deaths than the target for the state? Don't we lose federal funding and our... Yeah, that's what I think that you need to explain to our chair.
Yeah, in terms of the target, if the state of Indiana fails to meet its target, or targets, I should say. If the state of Indiana fails to meet its targets, they are therefore penalized, and those penalties, they take away money from what I would call normal highway construction funds, surface transportation block grant funds, and those monies are reallocated then to safety projects. In other words, the state is mandated to spend more money on safety projects, highway safety improvement program projects, and if they involve pedestrian and bicycles, that would involve pedestrian and bicycle facilities, or what have you. So yeah, I mean, there is a carrot and a stick here in that, and this is part of the law. It's written into the law that was passed by Congress. So, I mean, it behooves the state of Indiana to try and do everything it can within its powers to keep fatalities, suspected serious injuries, and then pedestrian fatalities and suspected serious injuries, to keep them down as low as possible. It's within their financial interest and also in terms of their investment interests.
And what is the consequence if the MPO does not approve the targets of this MPO?
Then we would probably lose our certification for federal funding for the Transportation Improvement Program.
Very good. Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, the calendar year 2021 Indot Public Transit Annual Report.
Okay, this is included in your packet just as a reference item. The Indiana Department of Transportation Office of Public Transit publishes an annual report, and these go back to, I believe, the 1980s or so. The one published for this year, which just came out while we were on summer break, shows Bloomington Transit still remains near the top of all the transit systems in terms of total ridership and also in terms of revenue passenger miles. But it also shows that with that top, I mean, the bottom was the calendar year before, and then there showed a modest increase in total ridership for calendar year 2021, but that modest increase is still substantially lower than what it originally was pre-pandemic. Anyway, it's out there for your reference. It's an extensive publication, and it looks at all the public transit systems in the entire state of Indiana, including all the rural transit type of operations and the urban operations. But I would recommend that you at least glance at it. It's usually about a 5-minute read or so. And the data in there is all provided by Bloomington Transit for Bloomington Transit. Questions?
Are there any questions on the Public Transit Annual Report? To my right? To my left? If not, we'll move on to the next item, the Indot Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Plan.
Okay, prior to our summer break, I reported on the fact that the Indiana Department of Transportation was in the process of developing a draft electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan. This is a requirement for to fulfill the requirement of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill law, which signed into legislation, approved by Congress and signed into legislation by the President in January, February of this calendar year. The electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan had a public meeting down at the Seymour District, which I attended as a public official, and I was one of the few public officials there because there was substantial private enterprise interest in this plan. The plan calls for the deployment of level 3 electric vehicle charging stations across the state of Indiana. Vast majority of those would initially be developed along the interstate system, and those level 3 charging station locations, according to the state of Indiana, would be done with public-private partnerships, where the federal funds would be used for 80% of the installment, and then 20% local match would be by a private enterprise vendor themselves. In other words, you could pull into a gas station or a rest stop or whatever that's privately owned, private venture, and charge your vehicle there. There is no thought to anything less than a level 3 charging station, simply because the level 2s and the level 1s would take hours upon hours. Also, the amount of money that's available for this, I believe it's slightly over $1 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars nationwide on an annual basis over the course of the next 10 years. But if you divide that up among the 50 states and you divide it up based on population, the amount of money that trickles down to the state of Indiana is what I would call somewhat nominal. That's not to say that private enterprise could not install these level 3 charging stations with 100% of their own money, but it's to say that this is the plan, this is how it would be rolled out, and it's all available for view for anybody in view and comment. The plan will be finalized, must be finalized with the U.S. Department of Transportation by September 30th, and then it goes into effect on October 1st.
Questions? To my left? To my right? See none, we'll move on. Oh, sorry, Ms. Kinsey.
All right, one quick question. So I think I asked a question similar to this when we talked about this bill the last time, but the idea of ensuring that more electrical vehicle charging stations were available as part of planning documents or planning decisions. And now you're making me think about this level 2 versus level 3 distinction, and if there's planning staff attention now to ensuring that both levels, I could see how a longer charge station might be reasonable in a residential apartment complex versus a on the roadside. You don't want to sit there for 2.5 hours. So I'm wondering if there are some, if we're getting to that level of distinction even in private planning, or in city-approved planning pieces where there's a distinction that could be made between a level 2 versus a level 3 based on the kind of place it is. Do you have any awareness of that?
I mean, the level 1s are typically in your home garage or out back on the back 40 or something, and the level 2s are predominantly in what I would call the developments, the new developments. I was a little bit stunned by the fact that they want level 3s on everything, but then when you look at the charging times, level 3 is the only thing that makes sense if you're going to locate them along the interstate highway system, or you're going to locate them along high volume major arterial corridors throughout the state of Indiana, such as 37 corridor, 31 corridor, or something like that. Yeah, I mean, personally, I would think that it would behoove every developer to start thinking of level 3 chargers for everything, because it's like the chicken or the egg. You're not going to have the electric vehicles unless you have the charging stations, and that'll be for private development. I mean, that would be a cachet attraction of having level 3 chargers at your development site, because then that would attract more use of electric vehicles.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about, I just can't recall, well, I know, well, at least I don't believe that in anything we've approved recently with this as a condition that it specified a level at all. So it's just an interesting thing when I imagine, for example, the garage that we just approved, and I don't know what levels in that. If it's, I hope it's not 1 where, but it could be, I suppose. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Reiterbrand.
Could you also give us a notion, if you can, of the cost differential between a level 2 and a level 3 unit, and why it might be attractive for many of these areas to use level 2 versus a level 3 in terms of their investment dollars?
Yeah, I mean, the meeting that I attended in the Seymour District, there was somebody there. He was a town manager. I can't remember the name of the town. But he was a town manager, and he said they were installing, the town was putting out 3 level 1 charging stations, and they were $40,000 apiece. And the town only had a population of 1,200. But they were looking at it in terms of economic development, getting people off the interstate to come into the town, charge your car, stay a long time for a long lunch. But they were in the vicinity of $40,000 was what he quoted. Now, in terms of the level 3, you're looking at somewhere around $125,000 to $200,000, depending on what you want to do. I mean, are you putting in one hose, or are you putting in a double, or what have you? I don't know. I mean, I'm just going off memory on the numbers that they threw out, but it was like $125,000 versus $40,000.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Further questions on my left? On my right, Ms. Wiltz.
So in looking at the plan, I see nothing in it about the U.S. Access Board's recent recommendations on making these charging stations accessible for people who are disabled. And I was wondering if in the public or the meeting that you attended, if that came up at all. I'm planning to submit a comment just to make sure. I mean, it's required, but it would be nice to at least see it in the plan. So nothing came up?
That I have not looked totally at the plan, but that's a good catch. I will look at that, and I would strongly recommend that you make that comment submission.
Thank you.
Further questions? If not, we'll move on to old business. I believe these do require motion to introduce, if I'm not mistaken. But we're looking at the fiscal year 2022-2026 TIP Amendment number 1, DES number 2200146. Does this not require a motion?
No, that's okay. We'll go into presenting it first.
Okay.
Yes, this is a Transportation Improvement Program amendment sponsored by Indiana University. It is the superstructure replacement on Eagleson Avenue over the Indiana Railroad. It is not currently in the TIP, but it has a DES number of 2200146. And it is a bridge project, so it is exempt from the Complete Streets policy. And this project is kind of a ways out. Its anticipated letting date is January 14th of fiscal year 26. However, it's using preliminary engineering local bridge funds in fiscal year 23 in the amount of $348,000 with a local match of $87,000. And in fiscal year 2026, $2 million with a local match of $500,000. And at which time that this project is completed, we believe that Indiana University will probably turn this over to Monroe County, if I'm correct. But if the project sponsors would like to say anything more about this project, that would be wonderful.
The project sponsors, does that mean Mr. Bannock?
Thank you. I really don't have anything to add, but thank you. Lisa and I and the county attorneys have been working on this in the city as well. I think that what was said accurately describes the project, so nothing more to add. Unless Lisa wants to say anything.
Ms. Ridge?
Yeah, this has been an ongoing discussion. Monroe County takes care of the bridges. We hadn't accepted the bridge just because it needed replaced. Indot reached out to Monroe County, since we do basically run a lot of the federal projects through Indot. We have the experience to do so, so we wanted to assist IU in doing that. So we'll accept the bridge after it's built, and we will also manage the project during preliminary engineering and construction of the bridge.
Excellent, thank you.
Are there questions about this proposal? Ms. Reiterbrand?
Yeah, I think I asked it when we looked at this prior to today, and that is, we see that the construction won't happen until at least 2026. Is the current condition of the bridge such that it can actually wait that long? What is the current condition of the bridge, Lisa?
I probably cannot answer that because I haven't been involved until the last few months. But I do know that we are working rapidly we already, I believe we're going to actually run this project a little bit differently than we typically do. We're going to run it through on-call agreement with Indot. We don't have to go through an RFP coordination. So we're already a step ahead, actually. If we can get the project designed and right away established, there's always the chance that we can move up the letting date. And Indot's really pushing for us to get this going, get it in the tip. We have a meeting next week on turning over the bridge to Monroe County with our legal department. And there's already been some preliminary work established. So as fast as we can go, if we can move up that letting date, we will.
Thank you.
Ms. Thomas?
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that. You mentioned the right-of-way. Is that right-of-way regarding Indiana University, or is it the railroad?
So all of the property around there is either the city or IU. And so we don't see any issues with that. What we actually have is an easement to occupy that area. So the railroad does own that property, but we, like Lisa said, we're going to meet with the county attorneys, and we have ways that we can make all of that work and likely not even need to involve the railroad, frankly. So.
Further questions on my left? On my right? I've got a couple. So, first of all, what led IU to sponsor this amendment? Is the bridge, I mean, I take it from Ms. Reiterbrand's question that the bridge is in bad shape.
Correct. So it was flagged by Indot a couple of years ago as needing repairs, and so there was kind of an immediate short-term fix as an option, and then a long-term fix. So a couple of years ago, the short-term fix was done in anticipation that the long-term fix would be done in the near future, and that's what this is.
Second question is maybe this is for Indot, maybe this is for staff, is there a precedent for, I mean, if we put it in the tip for the beginning of 2026 to be built, you know, what's the precedent for it being moved up? Like, do we have to vote on that? How does that decision get made? Does Indot want this to be built faster if it can be built faster? And how would that change happen?
Tip amendments?
We would have to approve it being let sooner.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, well, according to this amendment, it would be let in 2026. But let's say that it's in everybody's interest to it be let sooner. I mean, it sounds like it's in Indot's interest.
Depending on funding, right?
Sure.
And
Funding.
NDOT typically operates on a 5-year plan anyway, development time. So you really aren't starting off that early. I mean, it takes some time.
Okay.
Yeah, funding, environmental agreements with the railroads, you're dealing with the railroad. and agreements with the railroads, force account agreements with the railroads over the fact that you're doing overhead structure work, structure over their railroad.
Right.
And operating main line that they're not going to shut down. Moving it up would be really hard.
Okay. Well, that helps that.
But yes, to answer the question, if this were to be moved up, we would need an administrative amendment or a new TIP application to have that happen, and we would have to bring that in front of the 3 MPO committees.
I'm in no particular rush, just asking questions based on other questions I've heard. Last question I have is, Has IU given any similar thought to the 10th Street Railroad overpass? Is there any concern about that? Is there any chance of that being rebuilt? Because, as you know, we have trouble getting our buses underneath that overpass.
Well, that's not our bridge, so.
But the Eagleson Avenue is your bridge?
Sort of, kind of. That's what I said, that IU actually has an easement from the 1950s from the railroad to construct that bridge. And
So IU
maintain
built
that
the bridge.
Right? So, so that's what this project is about. The 10th Street Bridge, to my knowledge, IU does not own that bridge. I think that's a city bridge, or Lisa, maybe it's in your inventory. But to my knowledge, that's not an IU-owned bridge. But Steve, I think you know that, I mean, there's been talks for a long time about realignment of 14th Street, right, and 10th Street, and that's actually been stubbed out there in front of the new Regional Academic Health Center. So
I'm excited.
I think that at some point, hopefully before I retire, that will actually happen. Because I mean, we were talking about that in the council days even, right?
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, no, we would like to see it done. But
memory is
like I
good.
said, to my knowledge, that's not an IU-owned bridge.
Chair,
Ms. Reiterband.
that particular bridge you're talking about is not on our agenda. We've agreed to an agenda. That would be communications from committee members on matters not included on this agenda.
I respectfully disagree. I thought it was relevant. I wondered why IU proposed this. I have my answer, and I appreciated the answer. But your objection is noted. Are there any other questions on the item that's on the table? If not, we'll go to a vote. Can we please have a roll call vote on the amendment DES 22-00146?
Is there any public that
Oh, I'm
is
sorry.
attending
Okay,
the
that's
meeting?
true. We haven't even had a motion yet. I wanted that at the beginning. Can we have a motion to approve this amendment?
I make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022-2026 TIP amendment for DES number 2200146, Eagleson Avenue Bridge over Indiana Railroad.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on this motion?
Not that I'm seeing.
Is there any on Zoom?
No.
Okay. We'll wait one more minute. Seeing none, are there any final comments before we go to a vote? On my right? On my left? Can we please have a roll call vote on this amendment?
Kinsey.
Yes.
Reiterband.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Samples.
Yes.
Ridge.
Yes.
Volan.
Yes.
Seabour.
Yes.
Horn.
Yes.
Clements.
Yes.
Wallman.
Yes.
Nickel.
Yes.
Bannock.
Yes.
Wiltz.
Yes.
13-0.
That amendment passes. We now move to new business and tip amendments to the same tip, starting with DES TBD. Will staff please introduce this first item for rural transit?
Sure, and I'll actually go through all of the amendments back to back to back to back, and then mention about our funding levels, and then we can have some discussion after that. This first amendment is a rural transit amendment for 4 cameras with DVR systems for 10 rural transit vehicles. It is not a project that is in the tip at this point. And this project is using the IIJA funding that we were mentioning earlier, and it is for fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $7,600 with a local match of $1,900. The next amendment is a project that is already in the tip. It is Monroe County's Fullerton Pike Phase 3. It is DES number 1802977. And this is for the use of right-of-way using IIJA funding in what should be fiscal year 2023, and the applied for amount is $210,967, which I believe is offsetting the, some current local match funding. Monroe County's second project is the Vernal Pike Connector Road, does number 17002957. It's a project that is already in the TIP as well, and it will be using the same IIJA funding for construction engineering in the amount of $300,000, or $300,000 is the applied for amount. And then the next TIP amendment is the City of Bloomington's High Street Intersection Modernizations and Multi-Use Path Project. Once again, this project is already in the TIP. It is DES number 220020, and it is using the same IIJA funding for preliminary engineering, and the applied for amount in fiscal year 2023 is $640,000 with a local match of $160,000. Now, I say the applied for amount because if you were to add up all these four projects, it is above what our amount of $983,997 is that we were mentioning earlier from our IIJA allotment from the state of Indiana. At this time, I would like, I suppose, a discussion to figure out the resolution of how these funds should be spent in order to get to fiscal constraint.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there questions on these amendments from my left?
Questions or comments?
Let's start with questions. Ms. Reiterbrand?
My question is, I'll start with a comment that I know that the city and the county have been meeting on how to distribute the funds that are not allocated to rural transit. And I'm curious to know whether or not city and county have come to some agreement how to divvy up the remainder of those funds, and whether they have a proposal to bring to us other than what we're seeing, because certainly when the CAC looked at this, they said only if this is fiscally constrained can we support it. And obviously this is not fiscally constrained. So maybe Lisa and Andrew could help us out here.
Ms. Ridge?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to comment just so we can probably eliminate a lot of questions and discussions. The county and the city worked very close of coming up with the distribution and allocation of these funds. We agreed definitely keeping $7,600 for the rural transit in there and taking the remainder of the funds and dividing it in half to our projects. That would put $7,600 to the transit, Fullerton Pike at $210,967. Vernal Pike Connector, decrease that to $277,231.50, and decrease the city's project of High Street to $488,198.50. Correct.
Mr. Seabour?
Yeah, I'll just echo everything Ms. Ridge just said. Appreciate the close coordination, and I know the city has revised our application and submitted it to MPO staff already to reflect what was just mentioned.
Ms. Reiterbrand?
They've answered my question. I'm sorry we can't actually see the real numbers. And the fact that I'm guessing that one fiscal year, the one that says 2022, is that correct? The first project we saw put these IIJA funds in fiscal year 2022.
Well, we are going to require some new applications by Monday morning. Thank you, Andrew, for getting yours in already. I haven't even seen it yet. But yes, all of these projects are going to be in fiscal year 2023.
I'm ready to submit.
Oh, excellent.
Can we vote on them today?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
That's the idea, isn't it? Questions on my right?
Yeah.
About any of these items? Any further questions on my left?
So I would like to move approval of these tip amendments with the understanding that the numbers we have just been given will appear in the revised tip amendments provided to the staff by Monday at the latest, so they can be submitted.
There's a motion and a second. It's a little unorthodox. Does staff have any response to the motion? Is it not a problem?
Other than the fact that our target is 12 o'clock noon on Monday. I mean, that's when we want to make the submission. We'll be in before the chickens get up on Monday morning doing minutes.
Okay. Is there a deadline that you're trying to meet?
As soon as possible.
Okay.
But yes, it's September 30th.
Yeah.
Okay.
That these funds must be allocated or a purchase order must be obtained for.
Is there any objection to taking up all the amendments in a single vote? On my right? On my left? If are there any questions? Are there any questions? If not, we'll go to public for comment. There's no one in the chamber. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to ask a question? This is the opportunity to speak. Please use the raise hand function in Zoom or type into the chat. Mr. Clements will recognize you.
I'm not seeing any at the moment, but we'll give it a few more seconds.
Seeing none, we'll come back to the body for a final vote. Can we please have a roll call vote on all four amendments proposed?
Ryderband.
Yes?
Thomas.
Yes.
Samples.
Yes.
Ridge.
Yes.
Volan.
Yes.
Seabour.
Yes.
Horn.
Yes.
Clements.
Yes.
Wallman.
Yes.
Nickel.
Yes.
Bannock.
Yes.
Wiltz.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
13-0.
That passes unanimously. Let's move on now to public comment on matters not included on the agenda. There is no one in the chamber to make comment. Is there anyone if there's anyone on Zoom who'd like to make public comment to the MPO Policy Committee, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or type into the chat. Last call for public comment. Mr. Clemens, do you see anyone who wishes to comment?
Not at this time.
All right, let's move on to communications from committee members on matters not included on the agenda. Ms. Ryderband, I believe you have one.
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, probably 9 months ago at least, we looked at the public participation plan, and like the CAC, members of the policy committee had issues with the fact that there is no mention made of including members of the public who cannot be present in person. Since we've developed a great deal of expertise in the use of remote technology, we determined that we needed an addition to this public policy to reflect that. What you see before you in red is an edit, an addition to the public policy that I believe reflects that desire. We will not be voting on this today. We will wait until next month. If anyone has any comments on it, I'll just read this tiny section that says that public meetings and workshops, the MPO will try to hold these meetings at various locations throughout the urbanized area, and therefore will try to enable remote participation when members of the public cannot attend in person. If anyone has any comments on that and wishes to do a better job of wordsmithing it, I'd be happy to hear about it. Otherwise, I hope to actually bring this before not only the TAC, the CAC has already approved it, and the policy committee next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other communications for members? Mr. Wellman.
I just want to remind everyone to mark the calendars for the 2022 MPO conference. That's going to be held in Jeffersonville this year. KIPTA is hosting that, so that's October 4th through the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Wellman. Ms. Thomas.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question, well, and provide a bit of an update on the, what I shall call a cluster of projects relating to eastbound State Road 45, the bypass, Pete Ellis and Smith, all those intersections and roadways that are related to this. This is a Indot project. We received information this week that DES number 1800199 and DES number 1800086 are bundled together. We knew that, but this relates to 10th Street, Pete Ellis Drive, Discovery Drive, Parkway. And a number of changes have been made, and I think it's first that the public should know, and then second, I have a request from someone on this board. So these changes took place over the time period from November 2021 to April of 2022, and these resulted in some significant design changes, including the addition of eastbound, westbound bike lanes on State Road 45, east and west of Pete Ellis, which requires shifting the edge of the pavement on State Road 45 east of Pete Ellis Drive and replacing a multi-use path with a sidewalk. But all of this leads to the elimination of one westbound through lane on State Road 45 from Pete Ellis Drive to mile marker 38. It involves moving a crosswalk and some other things, but to me, the most significant thing is one of the things that was driving this is the excessive traffic in this area that's not managed well, and removing a lane is pretty shocking to me. So with that, I want to go back to last April. Mr. Slybor, I asked about a traffic impact study related to the hospital, and you so graciously sent that to me. It was from 2017, even though it had been requested through other channels and avenues. I really appreciated that we received that. So I would ask Mr. Slybor if there's any way we can get notes and information on how this change was made within the city of Bloomington that impacts this state project. I would really appreciate receiving them. Thank you.
Any further communications, Mr. Seabour?
I guess probably happy to follow up on this. It's this is an Indot project, so I don't know what my position in the city is to report on the Indot-led project, but to say that there has been coordination with between Indot and the city on this project, and that I don't believe that any capacity changing, the change that was discussed that you mentioned about a lane reduction does not affect any of the intersections and how they will actually operate. It was just, but I think it's something that probably should really come from the Indot, but we'll fully recognize that Indot and the city has, there's been some coordination on that.
It came as a result of coordinating with the city of Bloomington because it wasn't in their original design. So the design changed, Indot had a design, the design changed based on their conversations with the city. So I'm wondering what those conversations were. And if either party or both can provide that, we would really appreciate that.
Mr. Wallman.
Yes, we continue to develop this project and working with the city and other stakeholders, and we do have plans for public involvement, public information meetings coming up later this year, this winter, I believe. So, you know, it's still a proposal. We're still working on it. We're still working through design, and if we do have public comments, you know, feel free to reach out. We will be hosting meeting to help gather that input as well, so.
Okay, so if I might follow up, thank you for
Please.
that. I did not know that that was planned, because this is originally supposed to be led in February. So that worried me that we were going to have zero public input and zero, so I'm glad to hear it's an input meeting and not just an informational meeting, so thank you for that.
Any further communications from members? To my left? To my right? Ms. Clements?
Yes, I just want to point out, to drive the point home, that this particular project is something that I've been asking about for quite some time, and now for the second time, where I've asked for information that should be part of the public record and that should be transparent. I'm really kind of shocked and dismayed that not only is there a failure to be transparent, but to me it seems an outright refusal. And if serving on the MPO doesn't count as a stakeholder group that should be apprised of these changes, especially when requests are made of the bodies that coordinate this MPO committee, well, I find that to be very, very problematic. Let me put it like that. And I just want to state that for the record. Thank you.
Further communications from members? Seeing none, we'll move on to topic suggestions for future agendas. Are there any? To my right? Ms. Wiltz?
Perhaps this topic that we just discussed could show on a next agenda as an update.
Well, my question to staff is where this would go. Where would you put it in the agenda if there were to be a discussion of this particular item's revision, since it's already a part, it's part of the tip, is that not right? So if there is a question about any revision to an item that's in the tip, what's the protocol for reviewing it?
To the best of our understanding, this project development is still underway. It's a moving target. It's not fixed at this point in time. I know they anticipate a public information meeting or a public hearing. I would call it a public hearing. There'll be a notice for an opportunity of a public hearing this fall. To my knowledge, there is no date set on that because they haven't finalized plans yet. Once they finalize plans, then they would have a public meeting, public hearing, and invite public input and have the formal comment period and all of that. That's a requirement. Public comment period is a requirement for a project of this size. And there's always an opportunity for public comment and public hearing on this.
That's understood, but I think several members of the MPO have made it clear that they want to make an issue of it in this body. And so what I'm asking is, would we put that under new business, or would we put that under reports, since it's not yet a finalized?
It would fall under old business because we've discussed this this corridor multiple times. And again, the point is it's an Indiana Department of Transportation project, therefore it would have to have somebody from Indot as the spokesman for the project, because we're not aware of what's going on.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll take this under advisement in the formation of an agenda for next month. Any further topics, suggestions? If none, we'll move to reports of upcoming meetings. Should I just read these? The Technical Advisory Committee meets at 10 a.m. on September 28th. The Citizens Advisory Committee meets at 6:30 on September 28th. And those are both hybrid meetings, as will be the Policy Committee's next meeting, which is 1:30 p.m. in this room on September 9th. With that, if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion. Is there a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.